Hello, everyone. My name is Shelby Cearley, and I'd like to take a few minutes today to talk to you about why I walk to end Alzheimer's. So, what is Alzheimer's disease? Just a little bit about it. Alzheimer's disease is an irreversible degeneration of the brain that causes disruptions in memory, cognition, personality, and other functions that eventually lead to death from complete brain failure. Suffering isn't always hard to quantify, especially when the pain is caused by as cruel a disease as Alzheimer's. Most illnesses attack the body. Alzheimer's destroys the mind and, in the process, annihilates the very self. Alzheimer's disease can be divided into many stages, but it's easiest described in 3 stages: mild or early, also known as the initial phase; moderate to middle, also known as the intermediate phase; and severe or late, also known as the final phase. There is a more in-depth 7-stage global deterioration scale developed by Dr. Barry Reisberg, but this is for clinical use. Stages can last for weeks, months, or years, and they can overlap. The Alzheimer's Association stated that the middle stage is typically the longest and can last for many years, while late stage may last from several weeks to several years. I now believe that my mother fit this pattern. She was in the middle stage when finally diagnosed, although her neurologist felt at first she was in the early stage, and the late stage for my mother lasted only a few short months. Currently, there will be 500,000 new cases of Alzheimer's disease diagnosed this year in the United States. Around the world, 50 million people have Alzheimer's or another form of dementia. 5.8 million Americans now have Alzheimer's disease. Every 3 seconds, someone around the world is diagnosed with dementia. Every 65 seconds, someone in the United States develops Alzheimer's. By the year 2050, the number of Americans with Alzheimer's disease could triple to nearly 15 million, and someone could be diagnosed with the disease every 33 seconds. So, why am I walking to end Alzheimer's disease? To me, it's personal. Alzheimer's disease is in my family. It's possible that one of my siblings or I could catch this disease. My mother, Dr. Patricia Elder Curie, passed away on October 8, 2015, from complications of Alzheimer's disease. Her journey through Alzheimer's officially took 23 months from her official diagnosis in November 2013 until her death. And although she most likely had the disease for at least a decade prior to 2013, this seems both quite long and all too brief. This disease robbed my mother of her intelligence, her musical talents, her ability to communicate, and eventually of her ability to control her own body. It also robbed my father of his wife of 26 years, his sweetheart of 50 years, and robbed me and my siblings of our mother. But she's not the only person in my family who had this disease. Her father did as well. And I'd like to take a few minutes and share with you a little bit about both of them. I'll start with my grandfather, Burl Elder. Granddad liked to tell people that he discovered America in 1910 in a dugout 4 feet underground, aka he was born in government territory Gaines County in Texas, which eventually became Seminole, on January 21st, 1910. His parents were Paul and Sarah Jane Elder. Granddaddy's first business was a gas station he opened around 1931-1932, shortly after he married my grandmother Delma. His father-in-law, Posey Thomas, pictured here with Granddaddy, helped him dig the hole for the gas tanks that they're very proudly standing in front of. Granddaddy later expanded the gas station to include parts and service center. Per his 1940 draft registration card, his shop was located at 1029 South Main Street in Fort Worth, Texas, which was located at what is now the intersection of South Main Street and Rosedale Avenue. The location has unfortunately since been demolished. Granddaddy's next business was the Burl Elder Construction Company. This is a sample of one of the many houses that he built. In 1959, he built his own family home on Sarah Jane Lane in Fort Worth. His construction company eventually became well known for its fire reclamation work. He also earned a Texas real estate license and owned several rental properties in the Fort Worth area. He retired in 1974, conveniently the year I was born, although he kept his real estate license active for about another 10 years. Granddaddy met Delma Thomas when he worked at a grocery store in Fort Worth. He offered to carry her purchases home just so he'd have an excuse to talk to her for a little while longer. They eventually started dating and eloped to Marietta, Love County, Oklahoma on March 22nd, 1931, and they were married for just over 73 years. Burl and Delma had 3 children, Mildred Jean, Barbara Gale, and my mother, Patricia E. They had 10 grandchildren, including me, 7 great-grandchildren, and 2 great-great-grandchildren. Granddaddy graduated from Fort Worth Polytechnic High School in 1927. He wanted to go to college, but the family could not afford this. Instead, he went to work. He was rarely seen without a book in his hands, as he felt that was one way for him to continue learning. Burl instilled a joy of learning in all 3 of his daughters, and they all earned college degrees. One of the proudest days of his life was when his daughter Patty earned her doctoral degree. He was equally proud several years later when his grandson Tom earned a doctoral degree from Princeton University. His other passion was golf. In the 1940s, Granddaddy caddied for golfing great and Fort Worth native Ben Hogan, occasionally at a local golf course. Granddaddy played golf every Tuesday and Thursday after retirement, especially at Pecan Valley Golf Course. He was so good that he earned a bronze medal at the Texas Senior Games in 1984, an accomplishment which he was very proud of. Granddaddy loved spending time with his grandchildren. This photo shows him fishing with my brother Matthew and me in 1976. He also took us to many sporting events, particularly his beloved Texas Rangers at the old Ranger Stadium in Arlington, which was about 20 minutes from his home, when we would visit during our summer vacations. He taught us basic gardening skills in his flower beds and his fruit trees in the backyard. Zinnias were his favorite flowers. He took us to church with him and Grandma at Travis Avenue Baptist Church in Fort Worth, where he eventually rose to become a senior deacon. Granddaddy remained physically active until around 1988, when he had his knees replaced for the second time. That was also around the time that his memory began to noticeably fade. He couldn't remember some newer friends' names and stories, would misplace items, most usually his keys, and he would forget to take his medications regularly. This decline continued through the 1990s. I greatly anticipated but also dreaded each visit to my grandparents' home in Fort Worth because I never knew how much of a change or a decline I would see when we would visit. Granddaddy's physical and mental health deteriorated significantly in the late 1990s. Luckily, he did not exhibit the same erratic behavior and irrational behaviors that his sister Pauline, who also suffered from Alzheimer's disease, did. Granddaddy remained a cheerful, pleasant person who loved to interact with anyone who came into contact with him. I likened him to a 3-year-old child. He loved to chat, but now his stories were about things that happened in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. He had difficulty remembering names, although he could typically recognize people by sight until the latter stages of his disease. He moved into a nursing home in 2001 when my grandmother and older brother could no longer care for him at home. The last time that Mama and I were able to visit him was about a month before he passed away. He didn't recognize me as Shelby, but he still recognized me. He called me Patty K, the name he called my mother. It didn't seem to strike him as odd that there were 2 Patty Ks in the room, because he called us both Patty K. I hugged and kissed him goodbye when we left, told him that I loved him, and promised to come back soon. When we got in the car, I cried all the way back to my grandparents' house. Granddaddy died peacefully in his sleep on July 17, 2004. Now, I'd like to tell you a little bit about my mother, Patricia Elder Curie. My mother was born in 1949, the third and youngest of Burl and Delma's daughters. Mama and Daddy met in 1965 at Fort Worth Polytechnic High School, the same high school that my grandfather attended. Mama was a classmate of Daddy's younger sister, and they met during one of their volleyball practices. They soon began dating. Long story short, they didn't marry each other then. They each married other people and had children. Mama married and had 4 children. Dad married and had 5 children. After they were divorced from their respective partners, Daddy contacted Mama and started writing to her and to us. He moved from Florida to West Texas, and they were married within the month on April 7th, 1989. Mama was an accomplished pianist and organist. She originally majored in music accompaniment in college, but changed majors. However, music remained an important part of her life until she passed away. She taught private piano lessons after school for more than 20 years, And she also served as church pianist and or organist at various churches. In Levelland, where we lived for the last 30 plus years of her life, she was the church organist at St. Michael's Catholic Church, and she was also organist at First Christian Church. She remained organist at First Christian Church until early 2014. Mama was always a daddy's girl, inheriting Burl's strong work ethic and his keen hunger for education. She began her college education, as I mentioned earlier, studying music accompaniment, but she changed majors to English and linguistics, eventually completing a doctoral degree in the teaching of college English at what was then East Texas State University and what is now Texas A&M University Commerce. She taught at several two-year colleges in East Texas and Mississippi before starting a tenure-track position at South Plains College in January 1983. She obtained the rank of full professor by the early 1990s. She taught English and technical writing and served as advisor for English and education majors at South Plains College. This article was published in the South Plains College newspaper when she retired in 2013. Daddy and I started noticing minor changes in Mom's behaviors and attitudes in the late 1990s, perhaps a year or two before she turned 50, and these changes continued to worsen. She was easily upset and agitated, especially if we disturbed her routine. During this time, she also began having difficulties doing everyday tasks. She would sometimes launder the same load of clothes more than once, occasionally running the machine without detergent, and sometimes even without clothes. She would go to the store every day, particularly Walmart, buying things that she didn't need. She also used to drive nearly 10 miles from the Reese Center campus in Lubbock after her evening classes ended at 9 p.m. to the Walmart close to the campus. She would spend a lot of time there and often would not return home until after 11 p.m. I was often worried that she'd been in an accident and would sit up and wait for her until she was home just to assure myself that she was all right. Her cooking skills and her repertoire deteriorated significantly as well. She was no longer able to judge when something was cooked fully, so we were often fed either overcooked or more usually undercooked meats and vegetables. Mama refused to allow Daddy or me to take over this responsibility because, quote, it's the wife's duty to cook, end quote. Eventually, I was able to use the excuse of working late to either eat at my office or to recook whatever she had left for me. Mama also began to misplace things with alarming regularity, most often being her keys or her cell phone. Mama began to decline physically and mentally throughout 2014 and early 2015. She began to lose the ability to walk unaided. So in August 2014, I bought her a Hurricane. By some miracle, she actually agreed to use it. And I think she actually kind of enjoyed it because it made her still be a little bit independent and still be able to walk around under her own steam. By early 2015, however, that cane was no longer enough. Daddy had to hold her hands and walk in front of her when she needed to walk around. Mama began to exhibit more and more signs of agitation starting in February 2015. By her 6-month neurology checkup on June 4th of that year, Mama's condition had deteriorated to such an extent that it was time to put her in a facility, according to the nurse practitioner. Daddy immediately said no, but asked if hospice would be an alternative. He explained that we already knew that Mama did not want to be put into a home like her father had been, and we agreed that we would do whatever we could to keep her at home. This photo was taken on the last time she was out of the house when we went to dinner at Cracker Barrel, one of her favorite places, on June 15th. The move to hospice was approved, and Mama entered hospice care at home 2 days after this photo was taken on June 17th, which also was the day before her last birthday. Once she entered hospice care, her physical condition began to decline swiftly. She entered on June 17th. By October 7th, Daddy called me at work at 10:30 a.m., about an hour and a half before I had planned to leave for the day, to tell me to come home right away. The nurse had just left and told him that she didn't think Mama would last the day. I immediately left, terrified that she would be dead before I could say goodbye. We took turns for the rest of the day and night sitting with Mama. Eventually, Daddy thought that Mama might be stubborn enough to want to die without us around, although both of us were loath to leave her alone. So instead, I went around the corner out of sight from her hospital bed in our living room, so she couldn't see me, and sat on the couch while Daddy went to lie down. Sure enough, she passed away nearly an hour later at 4:53 p.m. on Thursday, October 8th, 2015. Mama was cremated at Lake Ridge Chapel and Memorial Designers in Lubbock, about a half-hour drive from our house. She flatly refused to have a funeral service. Being a church pianist and organist, she'd gone to more funerals than she ever wanted to, and she absolutely hated funeral services. She had also told us several years before that she did not want to be buried. She wanted to be cremated. When we went to view her the day after she passed away, the first thing that I noticed was that her hands, which were lying with the right hand over the left one on top of her stomach, her fingernails were manicured and her fingernails were painted with a nude polish. She had not let us properly manicure her nails for years, and they just looked so neat and pretty, and I just immediately was struck by that. The second thing that I noticed is that her hair was clean, shiny, and beautifully styled. The hospice nurse aides washed her hair twice a week, but she refused to let anyone do more than a cursory comb through. She hated other people touching her hair. So that meant her hair would get knotted quite often, and Dad even had to cut a large hair knot from the back of her head about a week before she passed away. And he had been worried that that would be an issue for the mortuary cosmetician. I finally looked at her face, and I was terrified that she would not look like herself. Thankfully, though, my mother looked beautiful and natural, and most importantly, she looked peaceful. It was apparent that the cosmetician had used foundation because by the time she passed away, Mama had been so pale, but it was a natural-looking foundation, which made her look quite healthy. And there was even a nice pale matte lipstick on her lips. She was wearing her doctoral robes, but it looked so different than the last time she had worn it in 2013, barely 2 years before. She had lost at least 125 pounds, maybe more, since May 2013, and the robe accentuated the fact that she now had a smaller waistline, which would have thrilled her. We cleared a spot in the living room for her urn, and over the weekend, I made a little memorial with some photos which we placed under the urn alongside the favorite baby doll and favorite stuffed animals that gave her great comfort during the last few months of her life. And it brought us a lot of comfort to finally have her home again. I tell you this because I'm terrified that there really is no good treatment and no cure for this disease. So what can be done to help? Well, Alzheimer's is the 6th leading cause of death in the United States. Between 2000 and 2016, the number of deaths attributed to Alzheimer's disease increased 139%, while those attributed to heart disease, the number one killer, actually decreased 6% in that same time period. We need to act now to help stop this and to increase awareness and funding for Alzheimer's research and resources. What can be done? You can visit alz.org to learn more about Alzheimer's. You can also visit the website for information and resources for patients and caregivers. And finally, and most importantly, in my opinion, is even if you can't give money, there's still something that you can do to help Alzheimer's come to an end. Take action today and ask lawmakers to increase federal Alzheimer's and dementia research funding. Ending Alzheimer's is possible with all of our help. So I'd really appreciate it if you could join me in raising awareness with our elected officials. Visit alz.org and click on help. And you too can become an advocate. So thank you again. And please join me to help end Alzheimer's now. If you'd like, you can donate to my walk to end Alzheimer's at the address shown on your screen. And even if you can't donate money, remember, you can always donate your voice. Thank you.